The conventional path, I'd say up until about 10 or 15 years ago for getting into law teaching, although it's been changing over time, was you should go to a top nationally ranked law school. You should get very, very good grades. I mean, you know, top 5% of your class, maybe even higher, possibly. You should be on the law review. You should clerk at an appellate court, and then you should clerk at the Supreme Court. And after that, if you have academic interests, maybe even with some years of practicing, you'd come back into law teaching, and that would be the conventional path. There are still a few people every year who are following that path and who get into law teaching in that way. But things are changing, and they're changing considerably. I think today it's fair to say that most people coming into law teaching have many of those credentials, although not all of them, but they have many other things as well. One thing they tend to have is a publication record. So people are doing a lot of writing before they come into the law teaching market. In order to get time to write, it's probably the case that you need some type of either academic fellowship or practice experience that enables you to do some writing after law school. And so I'd say at this point the majority, if not the vast majority, of people coming in to legal academia are many years out of law school, and part of the reason for that is that they're taking fellowships or they're doing graduate degrees in cognate fields, economics, political science, sociology, philosophy, history, literature. They're doing work in other fields which they're combining with their legal interests, and that's giving them an opportunity to do some writing. So most people are combining very strong legal credentials with writing experience of one kind or another, and making their way into legal academics, in part through other kinds of programs. Let me give you some numbers to reinforce that. I think that's a useful thing to do. So there is a blog which you should know about if you're interested in law teaching, which will give you some sense of what the law teaching market looks like. It's run by a professor named Larry Solom, who is at Illinois. The blog is called the Legal Theory Blog. And if I were you, I'd have a look at his entry-level data for the last few years. So what Larry Solom does is he collects each year data about every placement of a law professor in the country. So when people come onto the market to become law teachers, they send data to Solom, and he reports that data in his blog, which is, I think, the best source for finding out about what the law teaching market looks like from year to year. Here's some highlights from the last few years. So there were 158 reports of people getting law teaching jobs last year on Larry Solom's blog. 35 of those people had PhDs. 5 came from philosophy, 4 from economics. There were some from history and political science and other areas. 6 of those people had doctorates in law. 36 of them had LLMs. That's a master's in some area of law or another. So we're talking about close to half of these people with advanced degrees, PhDs, or masters of some kind or another. It's a very large number. If you're interested in legal academia and you don't already have a degree, this signals to you something about the path that you might want to be looking ahead to. Those numbers are pretty consistent for the last 5 or 6 years, up or down a little bit, but not by much. It tells you something about the way that entering into legal academy has changed in the last few years. Those are some points about how people get into legal academia. There used to be a conventional path. I think it's pluralized, it's broadened out from there considerably as the data shows over the last few years. If you're thinking about legal academics, I think the next question is, what should you be looking for in a law school? Like, when you're choosing a law school, what are the kinds of attributes that you ought to focus on if what you really want to do is teach eventually? So let me say a few things about that. I think the first thing you want to have a look at is the curriculum. Right? Does the curriculum at a law school provide you with the opportunities that you'll need in order to have time to do some writing, possibly some publication, but does it give you the space to pursue the interests that you want? The second thing, of course, and maybe this would be first in a list of priorities or ordered priorities, would be who's on the faculty. Right? Who are the people that you'd most like to work with? If you know that in advance, if you know what your interests are already, are there people in the fields that interest you or that you think might interest you who would be available to you as a student to give you some guidance and advice, to read your work, to help you formulate projects and pursue the interests that you have? Another thing that you might want to look for has to do with placement records. Right? Again, this kind of data from blogs like Solom's will help you with this. How are law schools doing in terms of producing legal academics? So some of you may know Brian Leiter has a ranking system which might give you some initial view about this. I'll tell you, Leiter's numbers are based on Solom's numbers, so you might as well just go to the source. The rankings are directly drawn from Solom's data. I've looked at Solom's data. I actually think some of it is not correctly tabulated, and so I think Leiter's rankings are off. I'd be happy to explain that and to go into it with you if you're interested. But in any event, it'll give you a rough sense of what you ought to be looking for in terms of placement. There are a couple other things I think you should look for, because there are still some conventional stepping stones, as I said, to getting into legal academia. So do law schools have specific programs to help you with law teaching? But second, you probably ought to be interested in what kind of clerkship program your law school has. That is, are they focused, do they have resources devoted to helping you get clerkships which might have academic interests, especially federal appellate clerkships, which are, if not a standard element in a law teaching package, at least still fairly common one. Many people on the law teaching market have at least done some level of federal clerkship.